Here in Alabama, our biggest concern really is that those libraries, in implementing the changes that are now coming through the state, they potentially will have to close indefinitely.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
We are going to bring on our first guest today. Dr. Marisa Allison is a public sociologist and community organizer in Huntsville. She's a co-founder of the At the Root Collective here in North Alabama, as well as chair of the Labor Committee for the North Alabama chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America. She's part of the Save Our Libraries campaign, which is a joint campaign of the North Alabama and Birmingham chapters of the DSA, and is going to be telling us a little bit about what's going on in Alabama libraries and how we can support library workers and the marginalized communities that are being impacted. Dr. Allison, welcome to the program.
Thank y'all. Hey, everyone. Love your show. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. Really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much for joining. And I wanted to just start with, could you give us some background on these attacks on the libraries? You know, how did this really kick off and when did it kick off?
Yeah, so here in Alabama, it started almost a year ago now, but this has been happening for the past 2 or 3 years across the United States that we've seen, just an uptick of book challenges, book banning, censorship coming into libraries. This past year, there were more than 15 states that introduced bills to, impose penalties, et cetera, on libraries and librarians. And it's just really, really kicked up. But here in Alabama, it's been in the last year. And we don't see that stopping anytime soon.
So how did it, I'm curious, is it the book banning? Is that where this is really like starting? Is that where you see it first pop up in a community, like citizens start showing up at the library wanting to ban certain books? Just tell us a little bit more about like how this has been playing out in different communities across the state of Alabama.
Well, it seems like over the past few years, it has been that way, that folks are coming into different libraries, making book challenges, but it's also happening in the K-12 sector as well in education. But here in Alabama, we had a small vocal minority that came out of a group called Clean Up Alabama, started in Prattville, and really were pushing back against certain materials in the libraries. This is largely a pushback against LGBTQ materials that are in the children's and young adult sections, although they've sort of disguised it as trying to push back against what they call sexually explicit materials. But what we've seen here is that they've started within the libraries. It's definitely reaching out into the schools as well. And again, this is a small vocal minority connected with Moms for Liberty, Eagle Forum. Across the United States, we see those same organizations involved in all of those places. And they come in with a sort of script of bringing in a book, taken out of context, read a selection of it, get folks up in arms, and then say we need to protect the children. And what ends up happening is that those books are either removed completely from the library or moved into the adult section. They're often misclassified. They're probably in the young adult section. Oftentimes these materials are sex education materials, but they get moved into the adult section, and then legislation starts coming through to punish libraries, impose very harsh penalties to librarians for shelving materials that are considered by this minority as being inappropriate for children. But this goes far beyond materials that have sex mentioned in them, looking at racial justice materials, materials just about families that are different from, the heterosexual norm.
So before we get into some of the connections to the state legislature that you alluded to, that I definitely want to circle back to, but before we get into that, tell us, why is this bad? It may seem obvious to me and it's obvious to you, but for folks listening, why is this like a concern? Why are we worried about this?
Yeah, I mean, especially for folks listening to your show, I mean, this is a labor issue. This is a working class issue. Our libraries are important places within society for folks to both have shelter from hot summers like we're having right now, but also for kids to have access to, materials, books, and such that potentially their parents or guardians can't afford. And these challenges in general are costing states, libraries, library systems, municipalities a significant amount of money to implement these changes. So, if your listeners heard about what happened in Idaho this past week, is that one of their one of their libraries, which is just a very small log cabin. It's just over 1,000 square feet. Their legislature passed a bill that would allow parents to file a complaint against certain materials that they believe are inappropriate. And then the library would have a short amount of time to move that to the adult section. And if not, if they didn't comply, then the library would owe $250 in damages to parents who lodged that complaint. This particular library in Donnelly, Idaho, wasn't big enough to remove it from where minors could get these materials, so they decided to make it an adults-only library, just so they would be compliant with the state laws, but also wouldn't be breaking federal laws of discrimination and First Amendment violations by moving those materials completely. But here in Alabama, our biggest concern really is that for rural libraries that don't have a whole lot of funding already, that are really tied up, that those libraries, in implementing the changes that are now coming through the state, that they potentially will have to close indefinitely. So it's going to affect workers. It's going to affect the working class who rely on these libraries, especially during the summer.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
That's right. That's right. And let's talk about these changes that are coming in Alabama. You mentioned, there's been the legislation. There's also been talks from the governor. Governor Kay Ivey has been involved in this as well. So what are they trying to do here in Alabama from the state level to our library systems?
Yeah, so it's really coming in two different spaces, starting out sort of in the state agency that governs the distribution of state funds to the library. So that's the Alabama Public Library Service. The board of that state agency last fall was sent a letter by Kay Ivey saying that the materials needed to be moved, that library funding would be in jeopardy or should be in jeopardy if libraries wouldn't comply to this list of demands that she had. And those demands, she didn't come up with them herself. They definitely were coming from these extremist organizations that really want to move this material. So in last fall, they proposed a series of changes to the administrative code in Alabama that decides how funding is distributed to libraries. There was a 90-day public comment period. Thousands of activists and Alabamians across the state wrote in to push back against these changes that would basically introduce censorship into the library. But the APLS went ahead and decided to pass those changes. So that was in May. Also in May, they decided to extend those changes even further to not just have policies in place to sort of address what they call these inappropriate materials, but they also are now requesting that come mid-July, that libraries come up with a plan to move all of those materials that they consider sexually explicit and other, this is a quote, other materials that are inappropriate to youth out of the children's and young adult section and into the adult section of the library.
Wow. I have a lot of thoughts there. One thing is, who determines what is inappropriate for the youth? And, of course, the first thing that goes through my mind is that, if you don't like a book, you don't have to check it out. If you are a parent and you're concerned about the books that your children may be exposed to, you could spend time with your children. You could go to the library with them. You could talk to them about the books that they're reading. I mean, these are all perfectly viable options for reasonable human beings. And it's just, it's so wild to see a concerted effort, like you said, that is happening across the country. It's clearly very well organized, or, at least somewhat organized and funded, to launch these attacks on libraries, the workers inside the libraries, and, the diverse content that's inside these books that a lot of kids are really counting on and need. And it's just, it's really, it's disheartening to see the state of Alabama and so many of our politicians, catering to what you call it, a vocal minority. And I really agree with that. I think the average person is just not concerned that there is, explicit material in the library, and that we should cut funding to libraries or threaten to jail librarians. That's even something that we've heard folks talk about here in Alabama and across the country, that, librarians could actually face criminal penalties for the types of books that are checked out. I mean, it's just really, it's extreme. So all that to say, you've been doing a lot of great work fighting back against this. You mentioned the thousands of activists who already have been writing in during that public comment period. But what are some things that folks in the community, folks who work at libraries, but also just, the average citizen who patronizes libraries, what can we do to fight back?
Yeah, I will go back and say that the legislature that they tried to push this year that would have changed the obscenity code and made librarians criminally, and then a companion bill that would have made them civilly responsible for books shelved at the library. That is already on, pre-filed for the 2025 legislative session. So we know that this stuff is coming up. We know right now that these code changes that are being pushed through the Alabama Public Library Service are supposed to go into effect come the 15th of this month. At that point, where libraries are going to have to comply to these demands in order to get this funding. That means that libraries, Ozarkdale is already planning on shutting down for a temporary period just to go through over 3,000 books within their children's and young adult section. It's going to put a lot of stress on the system. And so really everyone across the state really does need to get involved and push back against it. So right now I sent you both, and I guess it'll probably be in the show notes, a link to two things that we have happening within the Save Our Libraries campaign here in Alabama. One is a letter campaign that goes to a joint legislative committee where these code changes are sitting right now. That committee can convene and decide to push these changes back to the APLS, have them do a fiscal investigation to see how this is going to impact local libraries, funding-wise, to implement these changes. So if folks who are watching this program want to, they can follow the link in, I guess, probably the show notes, to sign on to that and try to push the legislature to get involved and push this back, to at least, try to keep these changes from being implemented so quickly. It's going to have a huge cost to our libraries. The other thing that we're doing in the Alabama chapters of the Democratic Socialists of America is, we are a group that's very concerned about workers' rights, working conditions, et cetera. That's, one voice that we haven't heard a lot from over the past year are the people who actually work in the libraries and are affected by that. So we've gathered a panel on the 18th of July from 6 to 7:30 p.m. It's going to be a virtual panel of Alabama librarians to give them an idea of what organizing could do for them and what possibilities there are. We have folks from the United Campus Workers here in Alabama, some library workers from other states who have successfully organized and our very own Adam Keller right here will be on that panel.
Yeah.
So we'd love to have folks sign up for that.
Yeah, really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a great opportunity to, discuss organizing in the library context and why we see union power as a really important part of the solution for this crisis that is plaguing the libraries and the attacks that, they're facing from these reactionary forces who are pretty determined to undermine public institutions, right? And that's something that is worth remembering, that this is part of a broader trend that we've experienced really for decades now, is that our public institutions, those that are supposed to be serving all of us, right, from public schools to now public libraries, they have been under attack, they have been undermined, they have been sabotaged. The goal is to defund them, to criminalize the folks inside them, if at all possible. It's really extreme, and it's, as you mentioned earlier, it's a disservice to working class communities who really depend upon the public libraries. I mean, it's poor and working folks who need this the most, and who depend on it the most, and will be the most impacted. So I really appreciate all the good work you're doing, Marisa. Was there anything else that I didn't ask you about that you want to make sure we talked about this morning?
Nothing that I can think of. No, I'm glad. Thank y'all for covering this. I think everybody just go out, get yourself a library card. Just because these things are happening, we still need to support our libraries. Use the rooms, the meeting spaces, start a book club, start a band book club, and let folks, both the librarians, the workers, and these marginalized communities that are affected know that you're there, and that you're going to push back against this.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Yeah. And appreciate you joining the show, and appreciate all your good work on the Save Our Libraries campaign. Have a good day.
Thank y'all. Bye-bye.
Appreciate it. You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.